Welcome to the first episode of The Offload. I'm your host, Phoenix Trinidad, and this is Zero Tackle's newest show where we're going to be talking about all the hottest talking points in the world of NRL. This week, it's Las Vegas, baby, if you couldn't tell by the shirt. We're also going to be talking about the Broncos, Thomas Hazelton, Dylan Brown, the Roosters. We've got it all in there. It's a massive episode. Let's go. Here joining us on the very first episode of The Offload, we have Darren Parkin, Zero Tackle Analyst and Storm fan. How are you, Daz?
Going well, yeah. Viva Las Vegas. We're almost there to kick us off again this season. But yeah, looking forward to jumping in it and getting stuck in.
Absolutely, Vegas, baby. And then we also have a face that you will see on the Zero Tackle channel. You probably have a lot before. He is an NRL Fantasy guru and para fan, the casual athlete. Longy, how are ya?
Doing well. Pumped up for Parrots' return to the finals this year and hopefully win it all.
Big call. And we also have joining us the man himself, the founder of ZeroTackle.com. Also a para fan. I didn't realize we were going to have two para fans on the first show, but Matt Clements, how are you?
Good, mate, and thank you for having me. Bit of a different take in that I'm looking forward to another season of probably disappointment and heartbreak with the Eels letting me down as they've done for many, many decades now. But, you always start off with a bit of hope and hope that doesn't get crushed too quickly. But with the Storm up round one, it's probably like to be extinguished straight away. So yeah.
Before that, we can have a group therapy session on getting beaten by the Panthers in grand finals.
Yes, that would be helpful.
And deal with all of that. So,
all right, let's try and keep the vibes high and the spirits high for the first episode, gents. All right, The Offload, first episode. Let's get into it. So, first thing on the rundown: Vegas, good or bad? We are 2 years in, where it's a second year. Are we hyped? How are we looking? Darren, I'm going to offload this one to you first. What do you think of the second year of Vegas, baby?
Yeah, year 2 of 5, and every side will be exposed to this at some point or another. And look, the theory's clear. They want to grow the game into other markets, more eyeballs, more sponsorship dollars, more big names. Obviously, the impact it would have on TV rights. And what you're looking for, I guess, in this early point is a pattern. Last year, the underdog won both matches. There's no pattern yet in that space. Obviously, you want to see a greater body of work and, clubs getting involved in promoting it. And then they've got to learn the challenges of coming back from overseas and then, balancing your roster and balancing your training loads and all of that type of stuff. So kind of a work in progress. And Matt, I guess segueing into you, what did you take away from last year? Because obviously the Broncos were one of those sides that we saw, and they ended up struggling. And there were probably more reasons at play than Vegas for that.
They probably were, but I mean, 2 of the 4 teams that went to Vegas last year failed to make it to the top 8. And I think both, even the Panthers and Sea Eagles, struggled a bit for those first few weeks after it. That coming back from international travel, it's not just going to New Zealand. We're talking like long haul flights and hotel accommodation and trying to find, places to train and all that sort of stuff over there. It's quite a hurdle that those teams have to overcome. So you hope that teams have gone this year have, handled that a bit better and learnt from those first 4 teams. But I mean, already we're hearing some stories about, clubs not finding their training grounds or having pools that they're meant to be recovering in, having parties in, all sorts of other stuff. That's just the trials and tribulations, I guess, of this sort of, picking up an NRL team and moving it to the other side of the world to play a game of football. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how those teams recover in rounds sort of 2 and 3 and 4, and whether they've learnt from not so much the mistakes of those 4 teams, but learnt from those 4 teams that went over there.
What I might throw in too is just from the eye test last year, it felt like a quicker pitch. So I think maybe the artificial turf, something like that, the fullbacks looked a lot faster in Vegas. So if you're tipping those games, have a look at which fullbacks you back to really break out in those games. Because last year it was, Reece Walsh, it was James Tedesco, who looked absolutely electric in those Vegas games.
Now, Vegas is becoming a bit of a sports city. Obviously, they've got an NFL team now. They've got Formula One as well. They have UFC events every second week, seemingly. But I guess you face the challenge. I know, for example, when the AFL used to wrestle with the Gabba curators who saw it as a cricket ground and, it wouldn't get prepared for them adequately. I imagine it would be a big challenge for an NRL team going overseas to a place where it's most definitely not a priority in terms of what they're trying to do for the local product. So similar to what you were saying, if they rock up and find people partying in their recovery pool and doing all that sort of stuff, you just wonder how seriously the locals might take those concerns. They might just say, well, all right, we'll stay home then. So you wonder how they balance all of that. So.
Yeah, I'm very much a vibes guy, and I think the vibe of having a bunch of NRL players in Vegas is absolutely love the idea. Absolutely love this idea since day dot. But let's get now into the Vegas teams. So first up, we have the Raiders versus Warriors. That's about 11 a.m. our time on the Sunday. Longy. So Owen Paddy and Adam Mariota in. No room for Danny Levi.
Yeah, it's an interesting team list. So some curveballs on all these team lists, but a big one was no Matty Nicholson as well. So he's out. We see Hosking recover in time for round 1. Owen Paddy's a guy who's got heaps of hype, great work rate and reserve grade. And we saw Tom Starling's role sort of change through the season last year, where there were periods he was playing, in reserve grade, 10 minutes off the bench, and then he got that 80-minute role for a while and then sort of reverted back to lower minutes. So I think if Owen Paddy's hype is to be believed, then he might be the future hooker at Canberra. So we might be seeing a bit of a changing of the guard there. The other thing I'll point out here is in the back line, Tamale comes in, and there's no certainty on that spot either, because Hopewadi's been a weapon when he's played for Canberra. So will Tamale play well enough to hold down that spot? Could he potentially beat out a guy like Seb Chris, maybe Xavier Savage, who have been in and out of the team as well? It really is an unsettled Canberra side. But the one thing I will say I'm very excited for, Corey Horsburgh back, ready to go. Only 4 games last year. I want to see him back in form and playing Origin footy in 2025.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving now to the Warriors as well. So obviously, a huge Wars fan, have been there since day dot as well.
Remember.
I think we said this in our best 17s. We talked about this in our best 17s, Darren. So that race for the 5/8 jerseys. So Chanel Harris-Tavita has won it over to Murray Martin.
It's interesting when we were looking at that squad at the start of the year, and I think that's what it comes down to, who settles quickly, which I'll sort of mention in the tip a little bit later on. But yeah, I do like the overall depth of their squad, Longy, in terms of that balance, and we've mentioned it a couple of times in the post-Johnson era that maybe they were transitioning in the run last year where they actually looked okay without him. There were a couple of other players whose absences hurt them a little bit more. So maybe that's not as, it's a massive loss on paper, but maybe not as severe as it would seem in reality.
Yeah, I'd expect they'll play a different style this year. So you look at this team and they're going to be less half dominant without Sean Johnson. But the forward pack is completely different. Just in terms of looking at it on paper with James Fisher-Harris added in, I just feel like the identity of this pack is going to be very different. So imagine running the ball up off a kickoff and running it James Fisher-Harris, Mitch Barnett, Murad Niokore. I don't think there's a team in the league I'd want to run at less. I'm open to suggestions, but I really think they're going to be one of the toughest sides to play this year. The other thing is you look at the edges and it's so physical. So RTS and Tuapiki are both dynamic ball runners on the wing. Leia Tower, how about his form in trial games? Did you guys catch much of him this year?
Nope.
All right, I'll give you the brief. He's a big man. He runs hard. He's hard to stop. Great footwork and a great fend. So I think you're going to know the name Leia Tower by the end of the year. But look at the Warriors and the Raiders. I think they're both massively underrated teams. They're not going to play glamorous footy, but they're going back to that tough sort of style, dominant forward packs, strong ball runners on the edges. I think they'll both be a lot better than people are saying.
Yeah, and then going back to the Raiders, so another point here is like Jamal Fogarty, can he hold off Ethan Sanders as the halfback in 2025? So thoughts on that one, Loggy?
It's a tough one. I think Fogarty is, again, a bit underrated. So I'm just going to keep saying this about these teams, but Fogarty's a pretty premier 7 in a league right now that doesn't have too many of these guys going around. If Canberra remain competitive, then Fogarty will be their 7, 100%. The only way Sanders gets in is injury or if they completely fall off and want to rebuild for the future. So I think we don't see Sanders for a while, but he will get his chance and he'll look really good.
Yeah. And then there's also the talk like he's trying to win that new contract in the process. He has a mutual option for 2026, but the club have denied him permission to look elsewhere at the moment. So it takes up to round 6, I think, for the option. So it's going to be an interesting one to watch. This game in itself, though, Warriors and Raiders. Let's go around the table for the tips. Matt, who's your pick?
I've got the Warriors on this one. I just think that forward pack, as Lonnie said, is superior. I think their halves, even though there was talk about Tamari Martin being in there, that they are a bit more solidified, I think, and they were excellent last year without Sean Johnson. And that back line just has class all on it. RTS sitting on a wing, to put him, have a player of his caliber to sit on a wing, I think is excellent. So, I'm tipping the Warriors.
Yep, log it.
I've got to go Canberra. So I like the settled spine. I think everyone's kind of forgetting how good Fogarty is, and I think he's going to show us this weekend. And you throw in two guys, Ethan Strange and KO Weeks. So that creativity isn't really matched on the Warriors' side of the ball in terms of spine. So I think KO Weeks is really going to show out in this one, take advantage of that fast Vegas surface.
Yep. Darren?
Yeah, I'm splitting the difference. I'm really confident on the Raiders in this one. I like the balance of their squad. I like some of the faces that we're seeing coming back from injury as well. Just a few numbers on that space as well. That favourites have only won 29% of matches in round one in the last 3 years. It is a round that does throw up some upsets, and Canberra have actually been competitive enough to either win or get within 4 and 7 of their last 9 interstate. Now, this is not interstate, this is overseas, but it is obviously a travel fixture for them. And they've won 5 of their last 6 opening round matches, and their only loss was by a point to the Cowboys a few years back when I think they were down 18-6 and came flying home and just got nutted on the line in that one. So they generally start pretty well. So, I'm backing them in here.
Yep, and I think the hat pretty much speaks for itself for me. I'm a vibes guy, up the waz. All right, moving now to the next game. So Raiders, Warriors, they get off the pitch. A couple of hours later, Panthers and the Sharks get on. Let's take a look at the Panthers team. So Longy, Brian To'o injured, Paul Alamoti on the wing, and Luca Garner at centre.
This is an insane team list. I looked at this and was just falling off my chair backwards. It's absolutely crazy that they've gone Garner to centre, Paul Alamoti to wing. There's a lot of talk that Jesse McLean might steal a spot in the preseason, and now he's not getting chosen over Garner in the back line. So that's a bit of a curveball. They might change it closer to game day, so I would keep an eye on that. But as it stands, that's what we're looking at. Jack Cole over Blaze Talangi is a really interesting one. So I'm a para fan, so I rate Blaze pretty highly. He's moved across to Penrith to take that starting 6 jersey and has sort of fallen at the first hurdle here. He did have off-season shoulder surgery, though. So it might just be a case of him recovering from that. But it's an interesting one to watch there because Cole's no slouch either. So a bit of competition for that spot. The other thing I'll throw in here is Isaiah Papali'i. So again, Parramatta fan, I'm a Papali'i truther. I reckon he's one of the best back rowers in the comp. And I think at some point this year, he's going to show that at Penrith. But for now, because we've seen Liam Henry pulled out of the team due to injury, I think he's been pulled into that prop rotation. So we're not going to see his real role sort of become clear until round 2.
Yeah, any other thoughts on that one, fellas?
No, 2 pretty powerful sides. I think it's going to be a fascinating matchup, obviously, for the what we generally see with the Panthers is, a little bit of change coming off a defence, and that they seem to be able to find those options, even though I think they'll feel these losses a little bit more than some of the others in the past.
Yep. And then looking at that Sharks team, so there's pretty much nothing to speak of here. So Scott has put in our rundown that Craig Fitzgibbon is the most unsurprising man in history. What are your thoughts on that, Longy?
Yeah, I mean, the Sharks are the Sharks, right? They know what they're doing. They've been close the last couple of years, and I think this is the year where they really push past that barrier. So the addition of Adam Fanua-Blake is absolutely massive. And what we see here is a bit of a contrast where they've added Adam Fanua-Blake and the Panthers have lost James Fisher-Harris. So I think that's really going to show out in this match, and that feeds into my tip, no spoiler. But I just think the Sharks will be too powerful for Penrith, and I guess that extends into the centre pairings as well. Luke Garner, not a traditional centre, and whether it's Kale Iro or Jesse Ramian, I think one of them is going to have a field day against him. So my view is this Sharks side is really settled. They're going to look really good, and we're going to see career years from a number of guys in this team.
Yeah. And I think one of those guys, again, I don't think you could talk about the Sharks without bringing up Nico Hines. So the $7 million man, Darren?
Yeah, he's often been spoken about as a bit of a barometer. Not so much last year. They had some good wins without him, and obviously struggled to find any sort of consistent output. But if you look at his overall capabilities and where his team sits in the pecking order, he remains absolutely pivotal to them. It's only a couple of % here and there for them to bridge that gap and get to the top of the mountain. And games like this one are going to demonstrate that, and it's where he needs to put his best foot forward.
Yeah, Nico's exciting this year because in that trial game, we saw Trindle sort of play more of a dominant steering half role. He took more than double the kick meters of Nico Hines in that game too. And we saw Nico go back to that floating 6 role that was originally what he sort of burst onto the scene with.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're going to see a big year of attacking play from Nico Hines, but I think we'll see him playing a bit less like that traditional 7, which hasn't worked super well in the clutch games in previous years.
Well, that's it. I think taking the pressure off him to control and run the game opens him up to do what he does best, which is moments and find those moments and try and win it. I think it was Matty Johns talking for a while there about maybe he should move back to fullback and play out of there. But I think having him almost as the secondary half there that just pops up when he needs to and does what he wants to do when he needs to do it, and let Trindle worry about actually controlling the game and kicking for meters and all that sort of stuff really works best for how Nico plays, I think.
Yep. All right. Well, that leads into our tips then, Matt. So who you got for this one?
I mean, for me, it's pretty much impossible to tip against the Panthers. They've been an absolute juggernaut for years and years and years. And I think, in particular, with this game being in Vegas and the travel and all the hiccups that might come along the way, I think the professionalism of that team and the squad they've got and Cleary coaching and Cleary in the halves, obviously, that will be enough to, beat out what is a very well-established and very well-run Shark side. But I think the professionalism of the Panthers has me tipping them, and very hard to go against that.
Yeah, agreed. Longy, who's your tip?
Yep, I can see this Cronulla power game just being completely unstoppable in this matchup. So quicker service over in Vegas. Across the board, I'm looking at the team lists, and I know we have to respect Penrith, but I think we're starting to see the beginning of the end of that dynasty. I've said this a couple of times over the years and been wrong, but here we are again. I'm going to say it again. So I'm going to go Cronulla to win this one. And look, the best tipping comps reward the upset, so you get even more points from that sort of tip too.
If someone told me these sides would play in the grand final, well, A, I wouldn't be surprised, but B, I'd probably still tip Penrith. But I think if you balance where they're at right now, I know Penrith's season only went 1 week longer than Cronulla's, but with a couple of players going out with some off-season surgeries and maybe some interrupted pre-seasons, it feels like the Sharks may be slightly more set and primed for this one. Penrith, ironically, have played their grand final opponent in the opening round of the last 2 seasons and lost, the Broncos 23 and the Storm last year. So they are slow starters, not particularly slow starters, but they'll often be, out of the blocks with not their best form over the first couple of weeks. So I think if the Sharks are going to get them, this would be the time that they would, even with the unknown variables around Vegas. So I think the Sharks will plant an early marker in the ground and show that they can mix it with that top couple.
Darren, we're agreeing too much here.
Yeah, we got something's got to be done about that. We'll have a chat.
Well, I just realized that I have not even thought about this is a real coin flip for me. I'm a vibes guy, and the vibe is that you two seem to be agreeing. I'm going to go with Matt on this one. I'm just going to go with the professionalism of the Panthers. Going to get over the Sharks. So moving on now so that's Vegas done. We're done with Vegas. It's going to be pretty exciting. But looking at the rest of the competition now, Vegas kind of steals the spotlight. So let's talk about the Broncos, what we saw in the trials game. And of course, Longy, Kotoni Staggs is going to miss the start of that season. How do they look at replacing him?
Yeah, he's a big loss, absolute weapon of a player. But I look at this Broncos side across the board, and I think they're set to be super strong this year. So we've seen Madge come in. He's instilling a very different style to what Kevy Walters did. And my guess is it's probably Shibasaki in that center spot. Now, Shibasaki, definitely a downgrade on Kotoni Staggs. Staggs is a premier player in the game right now. But what I think we can sort of cover that with is the upgrades elsewhere. So Ben Hunt comes in. He's a guy who's led the comp in try assist a number of times. And you've got a fully fit Payne Haas. You've got Carrigan moving to prop to make space for Hetherington at lock. We're just going to see a very different style from the Broncos this year. So I think they'll deal with it fine. I think the Broncos will start hot and they'll be hot all year. And I think they're going to be a team that pushes around that top 4 spot. But look, I'll throw to you guys, Darren, Matt, up to you which one takes it. Do you see the Broncos being hot from the start, or do you think it'll take time for these combos to develop?
I think, watching how they did in the trials, they were excellent. They came out of the blocks playing really well. They basically used a full strength squad for that second trial, prepping them for to hit the ground running. Adding Hunt and Reynolds in your halves, yes, they're old. Reynolds injury prone, but if they're on the field, I like to think that you can pretty much slot any sort of new first grader into that lineup and they'll do their job and be carried along with, Haas and Carrigan and everyone else there. So I fully expect them to be, well entrenched in the top 8 for the whole season.
Yeah, I think so. And obviously Hunt will have to play a couple of different roles at times with some of those injury concerns. But of all of the sides in the comp, I think they'll be the most eager to hit the ground running. I think 2023 is still a better reflection of who they are than what 2024 was. A lot went wrong. And look, your culture has to be able to stand up to that, and it didn't. But they'll obviously learn some lessons from it. And I think talent-wise, they're amongst the best 5 or 6 teams in it for sure.
Yeah, and no Vegas to derail their season early either. So
correct. Yeah.
Right, moving down the rundown. So back onto the trials. So in terms of these trial matches, how much do you actually read into it? Like when you look at a team like the Roosters, they performed horribly. Spencer Linnell to miss the start of the season. Darren, what are your thoughts on these trial matches? How much do you take from those?
I always look at trial matches as more about questions than results. So how do combinations work? How settled do they look? In terms of the challenges that a side is likely to face, how do they address that? It's not so much whether they win or lose. I thought the Tigers looked pretty balanced in their match, and they're a side that I imagine will improve. Obviously, they have to, but I think they've finally shaken the worst of what's happened for them. The Roosters were always going to be not so much disorganised, but it was going to take a little while for them, given the enormous amount of players that they lost and the significant change. So they looked ordinary, but I think that's probably expected. It'll take them a little bit of time to find their feet. So, yeah, I think most sides would feel like they answered a few questions, whether you lose by 20 or win by 40. I think it's more about combinations. Matt, how do you sort of read it?
Yeah, I think most coaches know probably 13 or 14 players that they're going to have in their round 1 side, provided everyone's fit, and there's just a few edge cases that they're just trying to line up, I guess. And it's maybe even the guys outside of that top sort of 17. It's who's going to be pushing for a spot when there is an injury or, origin time and that sort of stuff as well. So that's where I really see trials is just trying to, nut down the guys that are actually going to be, performing and doing what they're told and actually, really pitching in. You're trying to look for that commitment from players and so forth. But trials, again, you're playing with squads of, 20 plus players out there, and guys only getting sort of, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. It's very hard for them to prove what it is. So I think, coaches themselves are, they use trials to just do a quick test, see what's going on, bit of fitness. Certainly that's what I think, guys like Maguire is using for the Broncos. It's actually just trying to get some match fitness through his top 17, prepping up, because you see early in the season lots of guys getting lots of cramps and things like that. So the more, which always amazes me a bit that they don't cramp up more in training. It must be just a completely different thing that you don't just slog your guys in training and get them to cramp up there. So match fitness is a massive thing. So that's where I see trials being. They're trying to get match fitness through the guys that maybe have had a few weeks off or injury and that sort of stuff, and then really just testing your edge case players, whether they can perform under that sort of pressure.
Because there are some big questions that have arisen from these trials too, right? In terms of testing those edge case guys. South Sydney, right? You look at them, Wayne Bennett comes in as coach. You sign Lewis Dodd for $700K a year. You got Cody Walker, probably not playing round 1. And then you have this whole public outcry for Jamie Humphries, right? I've never seen such a sort of opposition between sort of what the fans want and what the coaching staff seems to have planned. So everyone's all about, let's start Jamie Humphries. And he showed out in that trial game. He came on, they were getting destroyed, and he sort of came on and sort of turned the game around a bit. So I think he's going to get his chance in round 1 with Cody Walker not there and Lewis Dodd on suspension. But does he keep that spot long term? Is he more on the 14 spot in their long term plans? That's a big question.
It'd be a really interesting one if Dodd wasn't suspended. What Bennett would do with that. I mean, that's it. There's casual fans are screaming for Humphries to get that start. But, I mean, it was a trial match. He came on and performed really well. But what does that mean under pressure? You're down by 4 with, 7 minutes to go. Completely different sort of mindset. The opposition you're playing are going to be completely different when it comes to actual NRL matches. That said, I thought Manly should have given Humphries the start way earlier last season. I'm surprised that they didn't. I'm surprised that they sort of let him go. The lad looks like he's put on about 20 kilos of muscle. He's absolutely huge. And I think he'll be, as you say, I think he'll end up being the 14 for the Rabbitohs this season and fill in, hooker, halves, wherever he needs to, and be an excellent signing for them.
They lose Cam Murray too, right? So he can slide into that spot a bit. I think Jai Gray going to fullback. Gray might have been the 14 before this as well. Like, there's a few things that have gone his way for a starting spot. While we're talking about halves who are sort of on the edge as well, going to Newcastle, little number 6, like Fletcher Sharp, he was unbelievable in that game. And Newcastle's attack in general, they were just, again, it's that power game. They were blasting through their opposition in that game. And Sharp looked awesome. So does he sort of perform like that in first grade when the defense gets a bit stiffer? And I guess can Tyson Gamble, if it's him, sort of steer the team around properly at 7 to leave space for Sharp and Ponga to light it up?
Yeah, they were one of the more fascinating for pre-season anyway, obviously with the amount of chopping and changing they did last year and the heavy reliance they had on a couple, that if they could just get a bit more balance, that they're a side that might be capable of, poking their head up a little bit. So, I liked what I saw from them in terms of answering some of those questions for sure.
I'll throw one other little rumour in as well. Kotoni, signed from the Dogs to Parramatta, bit of talk he might be starting in the edge back row spot for the Eels. So not confirmed, but a few little niche para scouts that I know have mentioned that. So keep an eye on that as well for your team list.
Okay.
Longy with the exclusives. Welcome to Zero Tackle, brother. All right, moving on to, there's so much to take away from these trial games. Longy, I feel like you have the most eyes on every second of these trial games as an NRL fantasy guy. But moving on to some more contracty talk. So, Thomas Hazelton. So he has indicated that his preference is to stay with the Sharks. He's got interest from about 7 clubs, some of those being the Knights, Dolphins, St. George, and New Zealand Warriors. Where do we think he is best fitted? Which club lands him, Darren?
Yeah, it's been fascinating. I think the favourite to Landy Services has changed every couple of days, really. I mean, the fact that he's... you favour the incumbent, perhaps, if he's put his hand up and said that he wants to stay. But I'd suggest a couple of weeks ago that the Dolphins were probably favourite. The Dragons were right in the mix. The Warriors are probably one that have been maybe jumping to the front of the queue over the last few days. And I think, he'd be an ideal fit at a number of those clubs. But, if I had to pick one personally, maybe it would be the Dolphins. But... the fact that he's put his hand up and said that he hopes to remain where he is, Matt, how much do we play stock in that? Obviously, we're so used to that honesty from players in, declaring their hand. How much will they factor that in?
Well, I mean, generally speaking, I think all players want to stay at the club they're at, especially if it's a successful club and it's doing well. So I think he would accept a slightly smaller contract to stay with the Sharks, but then is he the kind of guy who wants to keep coming off the bench? Does he want to move into the starting pack? These sort of questions, I guess, need to be answered as well. And then at the end of the day, money talks. If someone's offering him $200,000 more per season for the next 4 seasons, that's $800,000. It's a lot of money to turn down to stay with the club that you want to. Like he's not getting any younger. I think he's 26 these days. So. This next contract might be one of his last. He's a big fella. He's a try-scoring prop. That's worth a lot of money in this game these days. So I think he will stay with the Sharks. But that said, I absolutely wouldn't be surprised if he takes the money and goes somewhere else.
Looking at where he is right now, what better place to be than behind Adam Fanua-Blake? Like, if you're I guess he's young in his career, right? So you're a young try-scoring prop. There's no better try-scoring prop in the game than Fanua-Blake. So the 1% he's going to learn from Fanua-Blake in terms of how he positions himself, how he runs off his hooker, how he prepares, all these different things are going to be invaluable. The other thing I'd throw in there is that prop prime is 28, 29 anyway. So he could potentially sort of be in his prime when he signs his next contract if things go right. So I would be thinking, if I'm his agent, I'm saying take a bit less money, stay at Cronulla. Don't make the mistake that, say, Isaiah Papali'i did, leaving Parramatta, jumping across to the Tigers, now being on the bench, having to earn his way back. That's what I'm thinking for Hazelton.
Yep, absolutely. So we're talking big money here. So the next one on the rundown, we've got two Para fans here. So Dylan Brown, reports emerging, rival teams reportedly offering him a deal worth $11 million. So I'm going to throw this one to you, Matt. You're the most passionate, I'm going to say.
Yep.
Which club should be making the biggest play for Dylan Brown?
Well, first of all, I think anyone trying to offer Dylan Brown a 10-year, $11-12 million contract, I think any player outside of Cleary, that sort of deal is crazy. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of investment. That said, what do I think about Dylan Brown? I think he's one of the best defensive players in the NRL, and he's doing that at 5'8". The amount of late saves he's made for the Eels over the years, where it looks like a try for all days, and he'll come out of nowhere and be the last man there to make a tackle, has been amazing. And I just imagine how good that defence would actually be on a good defensive side. The Eels have had their troubles on the edges and whatnot. So, and he's there making covering tackles. If he was actually in a side that could defend and then was able to do less of that sort of stuff, the guy probably runs, an extra 5 or 6 kilometres just getting back to make that last tackle. And what that does to his, ability to attack and that sort of stuff. What teams could use him? I think the Warriors. I think he could go back to New Zealand quite happily, slot into, their halves there, which, as we talked about earlier, are somewhat chopping and changing and aren't really solidified. Partnering him with Ponga in Newcastle seems like a good idea on paper until Ponga gets injured and you're paying him a huge amount of money. And what we've seen from Dylan Brown, at least so far, is that he's not the man to sort of carry the team. He's very capable at doing his role, but he doesn't. When Mitch Moses has been out, he hasn't really stepped up and been that dominant half. He just keeps doing what he does, which is, excellent defence and just being a sort of running 5'8". In fact, when he's got Moses next to him who's running it, that opens him up a lot more to do what he needs to do. So, if I was the Knights, I'd be wary about trying to sign him for a 10-year deal to partner with Ponga on that sort of money. I think it would be dangerous. Where do I think he'll end up in all of this? First and foremost, it's got to be said the Eels are just, everyone knows it, are just complete idiots with their, contract situation, putting all these clauses in for marquee players. We all know that. It looks like the club's trying to remove those as we go forward, but I like to think he'll stick with the Eels. I'm wary that I don't actually think anyone will pay him the money that he wants. This talk of $1.2 million, I think if someone pays him that, well, good on him. He should go and get it and run for the Eels, I guess. But I'm still, I'd still like to see him stay with the Eels and just on the contract he's on, remove those clauses. We'll keep him, carry on.
Yeah. There's a lot of agent speak going on in the media. That's what's happening here. I think Dylan Brown's being unfairly demonized a bit because his agent's trying to go and get him some money, which that's his agent's job. Right. I reckon with Dylan, fantastic 6. He's a pure 6. He doesn't kick the ball. He doesn't do any of that number 7 stuff, but he is a pure running 6, like you said, great defender. If Newcastle sign him to be their 10-year halfback, they're going to be signing another halfback in 2 years, I would say. Right? I just don't think Dylan has that in his game, but he does have the ability to be the best 6 in the comp. And his ceiling is in that sort of Cameron Munster mold, where he's just too physical and too powerful and too clutch in attack to be contained, but has a genuine number 7 steering the team around. So I think he should play into that. And if he does sign elsewhere, he's going to have to find a club that has a genuine bona fide 7. So Mitch Moses is probably the best in the business at that. Nathan Cleary does the exact same thing. But other than that, you go through the list of 7s and you've got Adam Reynolds, who's older, Jamal Fogarty, who's older, but a lot of clubs are playing, that sort of double 6 role in their halves. And it's not working that great. We're seeing the teams that are winning the comp have a genuine 7 in place. So I just reckon he might struggle elsewhere, whereas that combo with Mitch Moses is absolutely perfect for him. What do you reckon here, Darren?
Yeah, I think it's been fascinating that there's a piece which actually rates through zero tackle, I guess, how he would fit it at every club in the competition and ranking that order in terms of priority and all of that type of stuff. And I guess from my point of view, I look at a couple of clubs that are sort of in that, not the final sweet spot, but expected to sort of nudge their way up. Manly, the Cowboys being another one of those. You kind of feel like, I mean, if you look at Manly's case with the potential retirement of their superstar DCE going forward, those long-term options. The Cowboys expected to probably get a little bit better. Obviously, the Knights are looking for some star power, as we said, to sort of settle their revolving squad a little bit. So there's a few in the frame. But yeah, I kind of agree with that sentiment that the players probably getting maligned a little bit for the actions of management, which is perfectly logical. But I guess that's the way of the industry.
Well, at the end of the day, he's got those clauses in his contract, so he's doing exactly what's available to him, and that's no one's fault apart from the Eelsers that they put them in there. And any one of us in any career would always be looking to maximise our earnings and longevity in that career if we're enjoying it. And so, as a fan, you don't want players to leave. You don't like the sort of the noise that comes with players looking to secure their contracts, but this is his right, and as a para fan, you just want that sorted sooner rather than later. Is he staying? Great. Is he going? Okay, well, let's move on and work out what we're going to do with that money that is then freed up.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk that they'll do what they need to do to get rid of those clauses. So I think the new management that's coming at Parramatta, I'm coming into this year basically wiping the slate clean and giving them a completely fresh slate. So, because I was a bit of a bitter Parramatta fan last year. Matt, you should join me on this, by the way. It's very cleansing. But
I'm the same, actually. I think the change in the Eels this year is that even the way they handled the Clint Gutherson thing. I mean, he's club captain, absolute stalwart for the club for ages. But Riles came in and he was very open with him about what the club wanted to do in the future moving forward and how he wanted to do it. And they couldn't guarantee him a new contract, certainly not at the money that he probably wanted. And so a lot of fans, I think, are bitter that he's left. But, I think the club did the right thing by him and he obviously did the right thing by himself by going out and finding a long-term deal on the money he wanted. But I think that's just actually smart business by the Eels rather than keeping him around and having him disgruntled and having that, hanging over the club this year while he's trying to sort out his own future and stuff. Let's just be upfront and honest with each other. He's left and we move on.
Yeah, and I think as a Para fan, most of us love Gutho for what he did for the club. Yeah. It was a relatively mutual parting. He's a great fit at St. George, by the way. So Flanagan, a very defensive-minded coach. He's made some signings that on paper didn't look like they made a lot of sense, but you see the trial form and you see sort of that chat from Gutherson in defense in particular. I feel like we're going to get a new St. George this year. So that's a match made in heaven. I'm hoping he does well over there and can stay fit for the year.
Yep. Let's wrap it up there, fellas. Favorite quote from Matt Clements on the first episode of The Offload: Parramatta are complete idiots. That is the best way to end the first episode of The Offload. Thank you so much for coming on. So we'll do the rounds, we'll do the outro plug. So Darren Parkin, you'll be on the channel at Zero Tackle every now and then.
Yeah, I'll pop my head up from time to time.
Absolutely. And Longy, the casual athlete, tell us a little bit about the NRL Fantasy stuff you've got planned for this year.
Yeah. So going to be doing some content with Zero around fantasy. So our top buys, point of difference players, some top scorers of the week. Outside of that, I've got a bunch going on YouTube as well. So sort of deep dive content, really nerdy NRL fantasy stuff. And then if you jump over to the Instagram, casual NRL, there's always updates on stats and sort of late mail, and that Kautonga news, for example, broke there a couple of hours ago. So check me out there, guys.
Excellent.
Deep. And Matt Clements, the founder of ZeroTackle.com. What do we have there? Some new tipping.
That's right. We've just launched NRL tipping on Zero Tackle. You can find that on the homepage. There's a tile there you can click on. But it's a bit different to normal tipping. You're not just tipping the winner. You're trying to work the odds, I guess, and try and basically tip on the odds, so you can earn more points. If you get the long shot correct, you'll earn heaps of points. if you tip the favourite and the favourite comes in, well, you still get some points. There's not as much as the long shot. So by all means, check that out. I think it's going to be very fun this year, trying to see how we can work those odds.
All right, that is it. Love your work, fellas, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and throw down your opinions in the comments.